Good morning, everybody. Today, I'm going to handle a topic for you all titled Renaissance. I'll give you an insight on Renaissance in detail. The Renaissance is an event that drew a clear line between the medieval and the modern world. The Renaissance brought innovation to English literature, which was mainly concentrated on mystery plays that were religious in nature. Shakespeare's plays, written during the Renaissance, are the commentaries and a reflection of the Renaissance emphasis on humanism. For example, Hamlet includes the theme of the father son relationship, guilt, and some others. Hudson said the Renaissance aroused the intellect and the aesthetic faculties. In a broader sense, Renaissance was the beginning of intellectual movement. Renaissance is greatly applied to the revival of arts, literature, and education in Europe under the influence of Greek and Latin. The effect of Renaissance on English literature. The impact of Renaissance on English literature is an increased willingness of writers to satirize existing works. The most significant impact of the Renaissance on English literature was seen in the changes of perception of human beings. For example, the words of Williams: "Now he looked inward into his soul, seeking the meaning of experience in terms of his free individuality." The Renaissance brought about a new spirit in English literature in all its aspects. The thirst for classical learning also gave a new impetus to literature. All the forms of literature were developed during this period. Now we can focus on the impact of Renaissance on drama. The Renaissance scored its first clear impact on English drama in the middle of the 16th century. During the Renaissance, drama became more secularized and reached crowning glory in the hands of university wits such as Marlowe, Shakespeare, and Ben Jonson. Among the university wits, Marlowe has been called the true child of Renaissance. The heroes in his plays show an infinite desire for knowledge, wealth, and power. Shakespeare introduced all the forms of drama. He wrote historical and romantic plays. His greatest achievement was in the field of tragedy. Ben Jonson introduced a new kind of drama known as comedy of humor. In his plays, the social evils and lust for money are shown that was found in English society. The tragic plays of blood and revenge were introduced by John Webster in this age. Examples: Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, Tamburlaine, Duke of Malta, and Edward II, which is Shakespeare's. And Shakespeare's plays also I can quote. Shakespeare's plays you have Macbeth, Othello, Hamlet, King Lear, and A Midsummer Night's Dream. Ben Jonson's Alchemist, Every Man in His Humour, and Walpole. These are a few examples of dramas of the Renaissance age. Impact on poetry. In poetry, the spirit of Renaissance can be seen in the works of Watt, Surrey, Spenser, Sidney, Shakespeare, etc. This form became a fashionable and a handy tool for the great poets of this age. Sir Thomas Watt and the Earl of Surrey were the pioneers of new poetry in England. They both gave English poetry a new sense of grace, dignity, and harmony. They did their best to imitate Italian Renaissance. Wyatt has introduced the sonnet in English literature. Though in his sonnets, Wyatt did not employ regular iambic pentameters, yet he created a sense of discipline among the poets of the era. According to David Deutsch, Wyatt's sonnets represent one of the most interesting movements toward metrical discipline found in English literary history. Surrey's works are characterized by exquisite grace and tenderness. He was a better craftsman and gives a greater harmony to his poetry. Surrey employed blank verse in English literature with the translation of the fourth book of the Aeneid. Examples: Shakespeare's 154 sonnets, Sidney's Astrophel and Stella, Spenser's Amority, Milton's Paradise Lost. With these few poetry of Renaissance era, England becomes a nest of singing birds. Now we can see the impact of Renaissance on prose. Italian wind brought the seeds of the novel in English literature. The most important prose writers who exhibit well the influence of the Renaissance on English prose are Erasmus, Sir Thomas More, Lilly, and Sidney. In the 15th century, the prose writings of Bacon are true spirit of the Renaissance. He is called the father of English essays. His essays provided the best worldly wisdom in the era of Renaissance. Examples: Sir Thomas More's Utopia, Malory's Morte d'Arthur, Erasmus' Praise and Folly, Brown's Religio Medici. The impact of Renaissance in 16th century England in the field of literature and culture of the nation. The early modern era has brought about various changes in the field of literature and culture of England. This period coincides with the Renaissance and the Elizabethan period. This essay aims at examining the impact of innovation in the field of English literature during the 16th century. This century includes the Renaissance and a major chunk of the Elizabethan age. Literature written in England in the reign of Queen Elizabeth I is to be referred to as the Elizabethan age. The English Renaissance was a cultural and artistic movement in England dating from the late 15th to 17th century. The Elizabethan age is known to be one of the most splendid ages in English literature. During this age, there was a rising literary culture in drama and poems, which had Edmund Spenser, who wrote his verse epic, The Faerie Queene, which had a strong influence in the literature of the vernacular. Eventually, this was overshadowed by Shakespeare, Thomas Wyatt, and others. Crucial innovations in English letters and developed resources originating from Italy, such as Petrarch's sonnets, Jacopo's Sannazaro pastoral, and Blanque's, and the social ideas of wit, many-sidedness, and accomplishment mixed with unaffectedness were imbibed in the second Cortegiano, which was translated by Sir Thomas Hobby as a courtier in English in 1561. Culturally, there were four reforms in the thinking process of the commoners, as a majority of people were immediately affected by the revolutions they saw. A person in their early adulthood at the accession of Elizabeth in 1558 would, by their death in 1603, have been vouchsafed and usually disillusioned insight into the duty owned by private conscience to the needs of the state. A connoisseur of history would observe that the root cause of the greatest of revolutions is religion. This is true for the Great Revolt of 1857, the Sepoy Mutiny in India, which the Enfield rifles, which fired many balls, had a tighter fit than the earlier muskets and used paper cartridges that came pre-greased. To load the rifle, sepoys had to bite the cartridge open to release the powder. The grease used on these cartridges was rumored to include tallow derived from beef, which would be offensive to Hindus, and the lard derived from the pork, which would be offensive to Muslims. That led to the massive mutiny and became one of the major factors further leading to the Indian struggle for independence. Another example will be the Reformation in Christianity led by Martin Luther and John Calvin, which revolutionized the minds residing in the continent of Europe, rubbishing the previous practices of indulgences, which led to the massive changes in European history. Andrew Sanders points out that the changes in English society during the 16th century on page 103 of the book, The Short Oxford History of England. The most important effects of the Tudor Reformation on contemporary writing was in many ways the result of its increasingly secular as opposed to devotional emphasis. The official ideology that preached that church and nation were constitutionally linked in the sovereign state and that God was best served in the world and not in the cloister was echoed, parroted, or merely tacitly accepted in the broad range of the literature of the period. The stress on the secular is particularly evident in the prolific development of the vernacular drama during the 16th century. Protestant suspicion, allied to the disappearance of its old sponsors, the monasteries, the chantries, and the guilds, naturally suppressed local traditions of popular religious drama. In London, civic intolerance and government censorship, banning plays which conflicted with the authorized religion or which suggested any degree of profanity, steadily determined a shift away from the drama based on the sacred subjects. Even given the number of play texts that survives, any attempt to chart the rise of a secular theatre in the period is hampered by the often random selection of printed volumes, manuscripts, and records which have come down to us. Certain plays or interludes written to commission or for specific festivities in royal, noble, or institutional halls were probably regarded as ephemeral pieces, while others were circulated as printed texts but were neglected or destroyed as theatrical and literary fashions changed. England had a strong tradition of literature in the English vernacular as the use of the printing press became more common during the mid 16th century. This tradition started with the Protestant Reformation brought in by King Henry VIII, as it became a call to people to reject the Catholic Church's interpretation of the Bible and interpret the Holy Book themselves. Thanks to the likes of William Tyndale, who had the desire to let people read and understand the Bible all by themselves further. This was the predecessor to the King James Version of the Bible. A few experts of the literature regard his contributions to English to be greater than those of William Shakespeare. Roger Ascham was another proponent of literature who happened to be Queen Elizabeth's tutor during her teenage years and is often called the father of English prose by the few academicians. He proposed that speech is the greatest gift of man from God, and to speak or write poorly was an affront. There was a major rise of literature and its influence in the 16th century. Famous works in prose and poetry written by literary giants like Spenser, author of Faerie Queene, an epic poem and fantastical allegory celebrating the Tudor dynasty, and Elizabeth I. Sidney, whose works include Astrophel and Stella, The Defiance of Poetry, and The Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia, and Shakespeare, who stands out in this period as a poet and a playwright as yet unsurpassed. Shakespeare wrote plays in a variety of genres, including histories such as Richard III, Henry IV, tragedies such as Hamlet, Othello, Macbeth, and comedies such as Midsummer Night's Dream, As You Like It, and Twelfth Night, and the late romances or tragic comedies. Other important figures in Elizabethan theatre include Christopher Marlowe and Ben Jonson, Thomas Dekker, John Fletcher, and Francis Beaumont. Poems were intended to be set to music as songs, such as those by Thomson Campion, became popular as printed literature was disseminated more widely in households. English poetry and prose burst into sudden glory in the late 1570s, a decisive shift of taste toward a fluent artistry, self-consciously displaying its grace and sophistication, was announced in the works of Spenser, and Sydney. It was accompanied by an upsurge of literary production that came to fruition in 1590s and 1600s. 2 decades of astonishing productivity by writers of every genre. So, with this, we conclude the impact of Renaissance in 16th century England in the field of literature and culture of the nation. Thank you, one and all.